Throughout history, several civilizations ushered periods of prosperity in the regions they grew up in. In the West, many think of classical Greece and imperial Rome as examples of this. But in China, the height of dynasties like the Tang and Song spring to mind. Sandwiched between those two poles of civilization is the Indian subcontinent, another cradle of human civilization replete of ethnic and religious diversity, cultural achievements, and great art. India has been ruled over by several tremendous empires over the millennia, but possibly one of the greatest, reigning during India's classical golden age, is the Gupta Empire. This dynasty, which flourished from the 4th, 6th century CE, created stunning art, as well as some of India's best poets and scholars. Its tenure also saw great advancements in religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism that have endured to this day. What was the Gupta state, and who were its notable kings? How did their economy and statecraft function, and what contributions did they make to Indian and international culture? In this movie on the definitive empire of India's classical epoch, we will study all this and more. Our information on the Gupta Empire comes from two sources, the first being literary materials, such as the poet Kalidasa, who may have lived in Gupta periods, and the second being archaeological evidence, which comes in the form of coins or architecture. Through the presence of kings' names on coins, art in temples such as in Udayagiri, which we shall examine later on, or Sanskrit inscriptions in places such as the pillar in Allahabad, we may piece together a good conclusion on the chronology of Gupta history and the essential ideals of its civilization. Granted, it should be taken in mind that all of these sources are inherently biased, being designed, for example, to praise the kings of the age, and hence should be absorbed in an academic context rather than at face value. The origins of the Gupta Empire can be found in an era when the Indian subcontinent was in a protracted phase of fracture and change following the collapse of the Maurya Empire. Various civilizations that dominated the northwest of the subcontinent, including the Kushans and Sakas, had developed and collapsed over this time, with several states like the Nagas, the Vakatakas, and the Kshatrapas rising to prominence, then collapsing, and vast sections still under control by Adivasi people or indigenous tribes of many localities. The Ganges plain was equally geopolitically erratic. Since the Mauryan Empire was the only one to approach uniting the subcontinent, the remembrance of it from some 6 centuries ago still occupied a great position in the social memory of India's rulers. One of the giants of central India, the Satavahanas, were a shadow of their former self, but had carried on the custom of supporting literature and religion and started the process of substituting Sanskrit as a language of high culture, rather than one just employed in religious ceremonies. Religiously, India was far different from what it is now. As religions of monarchs, nobles, and traders, the several Buddhist and Jain sects, which today are minority faiths in India, were nonetheless powerful. Hinduism likewise underwent an era of change. The most common form before the Common Era was the Vaidika, which concentrated on worship of several deities in a normal Indo-European manner. Considered preferred were gods mentioned in the Vedas: Indra for thunder, Agni for fire, Varuna for the ocean, and Surya and Chandra for the sun and moon. Along with the development of the Puranas, which brought Hinduism nearer to the faith as we know it today, this pre-Gupta period also saw the beginnings of the worship of Vishnu and Shiva. It is this chaotic period of Indian history, when the land was fragmented and its cultures and religion were in a moment of transition, that the Guptas would burst onto the scene. The Guptas founded their reign in the country of Magadha, the same territory from where the Mauryas had risen centuries before. This relationship to the Mauryas became highly essential to the Guptas, who utilized similar strategies of dissemination and statecraft to establish comparisons between themselves and the famed uniting empire of old. The kingship of Magadha itself became an instrument to enable the nascent empire establish credibility in the eyes of its peers, precisely because of its Mauryan legacy. The founder of the empire was most likely a guy named Sri Gupta, for whom the dynasty is named after. Not much is known about him, as he has left us no coins or inscriptions. However, accounts from the reigns of succeeding Gupta kings, and even some Chinese monks, suggest he rose to the throne of Magadha during the mid-3rd century CE. Sparse records aside, it's generally recognized that Gupta seems to have achieved a significant level of control over provinces in Magadha, setting the foundations of the empire that would come. His son, Chandragupta I, would be the Alexander to Magadha's Philip, conquering several kingdoms of the surrounding region, notably the Nagas of central India, and establishing the Guptas as an empire. From what we can surmise, the expansion of the empire was quite extensive under Chandragupta, as exemplified by the coinage minted during his reign, whose royal scenes of elegant harpists, nobles, archers, and Hindu deities project the visual imagery of a world-conquering monarch. After Chandragupta I, the Gupta Empire's most impactful ruler was a man called Samudragupta I, the son of the aforementioned Chandragupta I. His rule was defined by both the conquests he embarked upon, particularly against the western Kshatrapas, the Vakatakas, and the Sakas of Gandhara, and the great art he patronized, such as the great poet Harishena's inscriptions on Allahabad. The Allahabad inscription is of great interest, as it exhibits sophisticated written Gupta script, a successor of preceding Brahmi scripts, an antecedent to the Devanagari script of later eras. Moreover, the words themselves are an intriguing insight into Gupta ideology. This lofty column, the raised arm of the earth, proclaiming, as it were, that the fame having pervaded the entire surface of the world, with rise caused by the conquest of the whole earth, has acquired an easy and graceful movement in that it has repaired from here to the abode of Indra, the lord of the gods, of that prosperous Samudragupta, the Maharaja-di-Raja. By and large, the Allahabad inscription, alongside other inscriptions of its like, display how Samudragupta and other Gupta monarchs carefully cultivated an image for themselves as warriors, masterful poets, as well as a major philanthropist of religious endowments, all to legitimate their rule as enlightened philosopher kings. Samudragupta's successor, Chandragupta II, also known as Vikramaditya, was also well known for expanding the cultural achievements of the Gupta Empire, and was supposedly a patron of the Navaratnas, or 9 jewels, a circle of poets who, under Chandragupta II's patronage, managed to produce some of the finest Sanskrit poetry of all time. The Navaratna's most well-known poet, Kalidasa, extolled his ruler's virtues and power in the language considered to be spoken by the gods of the Hindu pantheon. This tradition, which had probably originated under the Sakas and Satavahanas, was popularized by the Guptas and established the standard for thousands of kings from Afghanistan to Java, who would utilize identical Sanskrit language literature for the following millennium. Chandragupta II was not just a man of letters, but also of one of conquest, having either vassalized or annexed the Kshatrapas to the east. These campaigns made the Gupta king renowned among people, as far-flung as the Buddhist monks of China, with one such monk, Efa Sien, praising him as a great patron of religious endowments. This was not something unique to the Guptas, for the royal sponsorship of religious institutions was a consistent pattern in Indian history, unlike in later Christian or Muslim kingdoms, which for the most part only had one state religion. Indian monarchs typically paid equal patronage to all the many faiths in their territories. Chandragupta II was no exception to this. While he was himself most likely a devotee of the god Vishnu, he appears to have granted property to and supported temples for numerous Buddhist sects and alternative Hindu schools. After the demise of Chandragupta II, a series of largely unremarkable monarchs arrived to inhabit the Gupta throne. After them, the empire would enjoy a revival in royal energy with the rise of rulers Kumaragupta and Skandagupta. Like his predecessor Chandragupta, Kumaragupta was a beloved patron of land grants to all religions, whether Buddhist, Hindu, or Jaina. Skandagupta, meantime, was a famous warrior, according to the Bhittari inscription, which mentions him fending off a Hepthalite assault from the northwest. Later monarchs like Narasimhagupta would continue Skandagupta's legacy and continued his policy of fortifying defense from Western invaders. However, in an echo of the Roman Emperor Trajan, Skandagupta would be the last great Gupta king who expanded the dynasty's dominance, as from that point on, the empire's frontiers were set, and for the remainder of its history, it would be on the defense until its steady fall began. Having thus ended a quick chronological tour of the Gupta kings, let us take a breather from the march of history and dive more thoroughly into what society in the Gupta Empire was like. By and large, the Gupta epoch was an era where lofty thinkers flourished. Many of the notable Indian scientists of the classical age, such as the brilliant mathematician Aryabhata, who is considered to have been a pioneer of the concept of zero, are said to have lived during this period. Works in astronomy, often based on earlier Greco-Roman breakthroughs, were also a feature of Gupta learning. As previously stated, Sanskrit poetry, written in the unique Gupta script, saw a great flourishing due to the dynasty's generous patronage of poets such as Kalidasa. Inscriptions such as the Prashastis of Allahabad are exceptional for their literary excellence, a trait which both brought dignity to the Guptas and facilitated their political performance in the arena of classical India. The growth of this reputation also extended to other means of literature, like as kavya, a genre covering plays, poetry, and epics with exquisite metaphors. Indian philosophy also grew considerably during this period, as the Gupta Golden Age was the time where the 6 schools of Hindu philosophy, Vedanta, Mimamsa, Samkhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, and Nyaya, were generating pioneering works. A charge typically made against the Gupta Empire is that it presided over a time of where India's cities were in decline. This, however, has been disputed by most modern historians, who argue that during Gupta reign, urban society was still vibrant in most of India. Consequently, this bias may have sprung up due to the fact that Gupta society primarily relied not on cities, but on rural agriculture and mining settlements to fuel its economy, which were sponsored by the royal court through a sophisticated bureaucratic system of tax grants and delegating land management to social notables like local religious figures, for whom religious ritual and land management went hand in hand. Overall, the Guptas maintained an efficient and institutionally heterogeneous realm, relying on assigning work to local monarchs they conquered, through an effective system of ministers and prime ministers, as well as delegating work to local Adivasi tribes and religious authorities. The Guptas managed to have an affluent, yet decentralized empire. In addition, the empire was determined to utilize marriage relationships for diplomacy. Numerous monarchs would have numerous wives and balance out diplomatic relations through the balancing out of military force, economic engagement, and diplomatic means. Although the Gupta Empire has been named the Golden Age of classical India, the two terms, classical and Golden Age, are loaded phrases which imply that this was an ideal civilization and that other times, usually where various religions were present in India, were lower. Neither of them are accurate, but taking those natural biases into account, we can nevertheless enjoy the enormous accomplishments that Gupta India made in both art and religion. Gupta art arose from inspirations from the well-established Mathura, Gandhara, and Varanasi schools of art, and is notable for its movement and floral ornamentation. Gupta art witnessed an increased concentration on the Hindu deities, most prominently adored by modern Hindus today, such as the Dashavatara temple in Deoghar, dedicated to Vishnu. Here, Vishnu is seen lying atop Shesha, the king of snakes or Nagas, while a woman, his wife, the goddess Lakshmi, is massaging his feet. Beyond Hindu monuments, Buddhist and Jain images of bodhisattvas and tirthankaras also were prominent across the Gupta kingdom. Religious monuments typically served not only spiritual, but also practical reasons, such the irrigation of land. For example, Udayagiri is a major temple site with diverse water management techniques. A big statue within the site portrays the deity Varaha, a large boar man, and the third avatar of Vishnu, who halted a large flood. The statue meets the rising sun in the morning, and the stylized attitude reflects the sense of the spiritual force associated with the water management that the temple provides. As aforementioned, the Guptas were important sponsors of all major Indian faiths, whether Hindu, Buddhist, or Jaina. Many temples during this period gained patronage and endowments. Universities such as Nalanda, which was mainly the purview of Buddhists, were affluent and robust in their creation of intellectual knowledge. However, the Guptas were largely Hindu by persuasion, and as such it was the quasi-priestly, quasi-judicial Brahmin caste who most likely held the most influence among all the spiritual leaders in the Gupta kingdom. Brahmins obtained many tax-exempt villages and land concessions, establishing their dominance as economic and social actors. According to Johannes Bronkhorst, the Brahmins could provide numerous services on subjects like as statecraft or astrology, something movements like Buddhism were not able to provide. By that logic, it was the Guptas that established up temple Hinduism as we know it today. The site of Bad Pathari is a sophisticated network of temples and statues on the landscape of huge plains, giving protection during monsoon by deities like Shiva and Vishnu. During the Gupta period, the old Vedic pantheon was gradually sidelined in favor of Vaishnavism and Saivism, which focus on Vishnu and Shiva as the supreme beings, respectively. Many Gupta emperors would identify their royal ideology, the sacred attributes of preservation and destruction portrayed by Vishnu or Shiva. Sacred literature like the Puranas also came about during this period and reflect some of the political reality of the time. Other varieties of Hinduism, such as Shaktism, which focuses on the goddess Mahadevi, or less-known faiths like worship of Surya and Kartikeya, were also present. Ultimately, the Guptas were the predecessor of Hinduism's dominion in India. The last Gupta monarchs suffered an assortment of political instability and decentralization. Dynastic bickering, compounded with onslaughts of invasions from the northwest, slowly destroyed the empire. After Skandagupta, the power and prestige of the crown progressively slipped into oblivion, and by the 6th century CE, the Gupta's empire as a whole had fallen into memory. However, the innovations of the Guptas are still with us to this day. Their contribution to art and religion, as well as the growth of feudalism and Sanskrit in India, made their mark in India for the following millennium. Many succeeding emperors looked to the Guptas as inspirations for kingship, statecraft, and religious reforms. This dynasty, while not as long-lived as some of its contemporaries like Eastern Rome or the Sasanians, made an immense impression on India in ways that still affect the subcontinent's massive population to this day. More videos about Indian history are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pushed the bell button to access them. Recently, we have started posting weekly Patron and YouTube member exclusive videos. Join the ranks of patrons and YouTube members using the link in the description or by hitting the button under the video to view these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, gain early access to our videos, join our private Discord, and much more. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps enormously. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.